Welcome to Rewatch Play, your dive into stories we love and how they're adapted. Today is a big one. We are on our way to Viserys' house to help him with his Lego House of the Dragon. My name is Randy Berridge. I'm here with I was going to call you the Meister. I don't know why. I didn't even write that in there.
Not even Game of Thrones reference. It's nothing.
Yes, it is. Or the Maester. The Maester.
The Maester.
Yeah. I'm here with our resident Maester. Yeah, not the Burgermeister from that Christmas cartoon. Oh man, this is the second time. Here we go, big episode. Even though I'm fucking around on this intro, we can't really fuck around too much because I know we're going to talk for a while on House of the Dragon.
Most definitely.
I think we can save our Game of Thrones thoughts holistically. We're going to cover Game of Thrones, I'm sure, at some point. You know, it's going to happen down the line. So we'll try and save a little bit of that. But I will tease up, heading into House of the Dragon, we're kind of coming off the downfall 3 years after season 8. What was your mind state? Give me kind of like end of season 8, heading into House of the Dragon. I think we can both say we're huge fans of Game of Thrones, huge fans of A Song of Ice and Fire. So what was your mind state heading into the new show?
Well, as you know, and many of our listeners may know or may not know, I have a Game of Thrones tattoo. So I was very big into it.
Wasn't it a bet?
Yeah, it was a bet. Let's talk about that for a sec. So me and my coworkers, of all people, from my previous job, we did a fantasy draft for the final season of Game of Thrones and would watch it together. And Jon Snow really let me down with his involvement in the season. I had the first overall pick, and I took him, and it was a wash. I thought because they were changing so much from the books that Jon Snow was going to have a bigger role. I was wrong. And now I have the Hand of the King tattooed on my thigh, which leads me to, for everybody listening, Randy agreed that if this gets 100 streams on Spotify and Apple and 100 streams on YouTube, he's getting a Game of Thrones tattoo with me. So I'll have 2, he'll have 1. So just keep that in mind. So make sure you tell all your friends to stream it wherever they can.
Yeah. I mean, if we get within the first 24 hours 100 downloads, I would.
Make it 48.
24.
2 days.
I'm not budget.
Come
on. Yeah. So pretty big fans. I mean, I'm not assuming, I know you were devastated come the conclusion of Game of Thrones, both for the ending of something big in our lives, but just sheer disappointment.
Well, when you had to watch a 1.5 hour episode that was just black, couldn't see anything, wasn't the battle they promised it to be.
Yeah. And I've watched a lot of TV and movies in my life. I've read a lot of books, and I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure I've been as distraught, and I think the word is festered over even the time after, where a year, 2 years later, I still was not ready to go back to it. I haven't been ready for a rewatch. I never watched the finale again. So I was just in a state of despair after this. Were you in a similar boat, or were you a little more level-headed?
No, I was pissed. I was so mad.
Yeah.
And then I got a tattoo. I think that we'll definitely talk about this when we talk about the book, but for Game of Thrones, the original series, it started going downhill for me when they caught up to the source material. And then they had to just do their own thing and kind of go with George R.R. Martin's vision, even though he's taken 15 years to write 2 sentences.
Been literally waiting.
Caught that up. Yeah, they caught up, and then it got bad. That's what happened. They had to go on their own, and it just didn't work anymore.
Yeah. It was like there were signs. There was more misses in the episodes than there were hits. It started to get, and then we just got to the point where the run-in was just tough. And I really held on for a while and was convincing myself and coping. And then I hated it, and I couldn't get over it for many years. And then we knew these prequels were not these prequels, but we knew spin-offs were coming. And I was nervous. I was just, I was not only nervous for my own enjoyment of this again, seeing it on TV, but I've never seen a show that kind of fell off a cliff quite like this in terms of like what it meant in the popular culture.
Yeah.
And I was like, are people going to come back? Is this going to be a success? Are the, everything for A Song of Ice and Fire, that entire world, to have any hope of continuing on in popular media, like this show needs to hit. So this was carrying huge expectations coming in. Were you excited at the prospect of a spinoff? Were you like, I'll tune in? Were you acting like a spurned lover and just, you did not want to get hurt again, Michael Scott?
I was cautiously optimistic, I would say.
Yeah.
It's knowing that it was going to be completely, not complete. It was going to be done. The whole season and potential future seasons were all going to have the story written already because they're just covering a few chapters of this book.
Yeah.
Helped me feel more excited, along with, really the end of Game of Thrones is kind of HBO's only miss for me. So I was, after, a couple other things came out, I was ready to give them that trust again.
Yeah.
I was ready to come back. And yeah, we did. And here we are.
We came back.
We're talking about it.
Now we're talking about it. Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. Yeah.
It was at least good enough that we decided to talk about it.
Yeah. We'll get into how we think about it. I'm not going to dwell on the podcast stuff. We cover adaptations. Check us out. We release every other week. We got a ton in the backlog at this point. Nick, where can people follow the show?
Read, Watch, Play podcast on Instagram. That's where you can find information about episode releases, what's coming up. That's where we'll interact with you the most. We check it all the time. So if you have any questions, comments, requests, let us know there. We'd love to talk about them. You can also send your negative reviews to readwatchplaypod@gmail.com. We will pretend to read it. We will pretend to be sad, and we will pretend to do something about it. So
I'll just say, for all my dorks out there, if you write into our Gmail, I will read it. Nick might not, but this boomer will still read your emails and respond to you.
I'll read them. I'm just not giving them the satisfaction of acknowledging the negative reviews.
Yeah. They might even be going to spam, and I have even no idea. But note on spoilers. This is a complicated one, and I think what I'll say here is this: I have not read past the show in Fire and Blood, so we're definitely not going to talk about anything past that. I mean, we obviously know future histories of where we get with Game of Thrones. So we're not going to spoil per se everything in the book as it pertains to House of the Dragon and where the show is going, because I don't know what that is, and I'll be pretty upset if Nick spoils that if he's read it. But even on the
read it.
Yeah.
He has read it.
Yeah. So let's be careful. But even on the bookend, this is more of a, we'll discuss, it's more of a historical text that kind of very quickly covers some of this history, and the show fills in those gaps. So we're not going to really be spoiling the book a ton. If you've seen the show, you kind of know what's going on in the book. We're just going to give some context and have some discussion around how this book translates and how we think it did. And so you can feel safe there. We're not going to head into at all season 2. Nick hasn't started season 2 yet. I think at this point of recording, episode 5 is airing tonight. But we're not gonna discuss that, and I'm not gonna try and let what's going on in season 2 influence my thoughts for what we talk about with season 1. Spoiler: season 2 is fucking excellent. So Nick, you want to hit us with some pew pews to get started here?
I've only got one.
Yeah, and I've got
Game
one.
of Thrones or House of Dragon?
Show?
Yeah, and just season 1 to season 1.
Oh, season 1 to season 1. Oof. I have to go Game of Thrones. We can talk.
It was so good.
Yeah,
so good.
Yeah, you can tell they have a lot more money in House of the Dragon season 1, but season 1 of Game of Thrones is like, it's like a warm blanket. Just seeing everyone young again and nobody's dead.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you,
Ned Stark.
Yeah, Ned. Yeah. Spoiler alert.
Rip.
I'm assuming you've watched Game of Thrones if you're here. Nick, what would your tourney weapon be? I said,
gotta go sword.
Sword? I was thinking you look like a Morningstar type of guy. And I don't know if that's because it's kind of like a baseball bat. And I could think you could maybe Teddy Williams out the fucking park, but
he knocks it out the fucking park. I don't think I would be good at that. I think it would be home run or dead.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
you got
I get one
shot.
swing and a miss. And I don't think I like those odds for me. So
also,
probably something.
I want to see them get stuck in the ground. I probably shouldn't chew ice into the microphone. I feel like in medieval things, the Morningstar, it's like that thing with the ball that looks like it has spikes on the end. Yeah. It always gets stuck in the ground. And then that guy's trying to like yank it out.
Because they're swinging it so hard and it's so heavy.
Doesn't seem practical.
A home run or you're dead.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what mine would be. I mean, sword is most practical. Realistically, probably just put me in the archer line. You don't want me down there on the front lines. I'm not helping anyone. But I don't know if my eyesight is cut out for archery.
Well, here's the thing. When you're doing archery, especially from like a battlement, you're kind of firing at a mass of people. So you don't really need great eyes. You're not picking one person out.
If there's enough volume out there, just have at it and see what happens. Exactly. Yeah, I love that. All right, synopsis. So for those who've only watched the show, Fire and Blood it's essentially, like I said, it's a fictional historical text written as this Meister. I know I'm going to call him Maestros. Yeah. Bradley Cooper is, it's written by I'm never going to be able to call it a Meister again, covering the rise and fall of the House of the Dragon, the Targaryens in Westeros. So this book picks up right at Aegon's conquest, which is the Targaryen who came on the dragons and united the seven kingdoms into one kingdom under him and his two sister queens. And I'm assuming now, I know there's going to be a second Fire and Blood book, and because I haven't gone past the show, I don't really know where Fire and Blood ends in the lineage, but it's ending somewhere between the conflict we're seeing on House of the Dragon and before we get to Game of Thrones. I'm assuming close to the end of what we're seeing. But I don't know, and I don't want to know, and I was too scared to Google it. And yeah, so like I said, I've been reading the show along with the book, or I'm reading the book along with the show. So I'm kind of blind as to where this kind of tapers off at. The background on it, I want to ask you first. Did you watch the show first or read the book first for season 1?
I watched the show first.
Okay. Yeah, as well. I think we both caught up on the book pretty recently. So this book was birthed it's kind of a tough word to use in this season, in the most typical George fashion. And I say that lovingly, as he was working on the world of Ice and Fire, which is kind of another historical text of all of Westeros, which I have and have read. And luckily I don't remember a lot of the Targaryen stuff. And this was in 2014. And his sort of section on the Targaryens was getting so large that he had about 200,000 words that he had to cut out of the book relating to Targaryen history, which I think I looked up. It was like 800 pages or something like that. It equates to.
Sounds right.
Just classic. Instead of writing Winds of Winter, this is what we're doing over here. So he had greatly expanded kind of King Jaehaerys's reign. I have firsthand experience that he expanded this because I'm reading it right now, and it's lengthy. It's like 200 pages on Jaehaerys's reign. And he decided to publish this as its own novel. This is kind of where the idea of Fire and Blood came from. And he, in typical George fashion again, it's going to have to be split into 2 novels because he can't fit it into one, exactly how books 4 and 5 went in A Song of Ice and Fire. And the first volume was originally released in 2018. I did not read this then. I just wasn't ready. We were nearing the end of Game of Thrones. I was focused on that. I just didn't even want to enter into this territory. And then I needed a palate cleanser after the show was over. I was like, I can't touch this. Pretty mixed reviews. Some people, I'm not going to even give this critic the indulgence of him naming him, but he said this was self-indulgent crap. But I disagree. I love this type of stuff, and I love that George cares this much about his world, that he's just willing to think about this all the time and write about it and expand it all out. It is I commend him for that.
I will say, to that critic's point, and I don't agree with them, but if you're not a diehard Game of Thrones fan, and like someone who enjoys reading fantasy books, this is not for you at all. This is pretty dry if you're just picking up a fantasy book to be entertained.
Yeah.
And if that's what if this critic is not like a diehard fan, of course they felt that way.
Yeah. Yeah. This isn't something you pick up and you think you're about to read. Honestly, like any other normal book, like you have to be deeply invested into this world, which I am.
This is and
even parts of it work for me and parts of it don't.
Yeah, and this is like the 5th textbook Randy's made me read for this podcast. So,
well, I didn't tell you to read the whole thing. You could have just read the Fire and Blood chapters, which I thought that part moved along pretty nicely after the context of the show. But man, like
save that thought, because I want to get into that later.
Yeah, so we can cut that off there. So yeah, I mean, give me quick intro. Got into the book, kind of what'd you think of it?
So I did that thing that I feel like only I do, because no one else has admitted to it, where I start reading and I read about halfway through, and then I watch the show, and then I come back and I read the end of the book.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was a little bit slow, but then after watching the show, I couldn't stop reading.
Yeah.
I needed to know what came next. I knew the characters, I had names, I had visuals, and I loved reading this book with the perspective of having seen the show for a lot of reasons, really. But it was a true value add to the show to having read this book, or these chapters. Don't even read the whole book, just these chapters.
Yeah. It's the ideal way to, I think, experience the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, is to like flip back and forth between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I don't think I could ever recommend this to someone who, like, nobody out there who hasn't watched Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon is just going to pick up this book and start reading it. And I wouldn't even recommend you watch or read it before the show. I probably would say watch the show first and then get into this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to that point.
Yeah.
So as you said, this is told from the perspective of one maester, but he references 2 maesters and a court jester named Mushroom throughout the whole period. And basically, there's these 3 sometimes agreeing, but sometimes competing views of the events that happen. And this is told as like a textbook lesson, right? So of those several perspectives, the show kind of cherry picked the ones that they thought would work best in this situation for the characters. And a lot of times they'll pick Mushrooms, who's like the most violent, and it's this crazy thing. And it's one of those situations where like when they tell stories about like real life, like if you didn't know it happened, you wouldn't believe it, and you would have said Hollywood's full of shit and this is stupid.
Yeah.
Do you think that if like when they pick these events that adds some sort of validation to the narrator? Like, so let's say you have 3 maesters and Mushroom, and they pick Mushroom a couple of times, but most of the time it's one of the maesters' views. Do you think that adds a validity to that maester's view and then as you're going to read further, does that make you pay more attention to that view rather than the others, just knowing that mushrooms might happen?
Yeah. I'll say quickly, I do think it validates it. And I'll give a little pretense for those who haven't read the book or aren't going to read the book. It almost feels like leading up to this point where you talked about those varying perspectives, it was a singular perspective. It was the Maester documenting the histories from Aegon up to the Blacks versus the Greens conflict. And once they get to that conflict, that's when those varying perspectives enter in, because there's there's so much kind of hearsay and conflicting narratives that's when that enters in that Nick is talking about.
Things happening behind closed doors.
Yeah. It's almost like everything leading up to that is like almost like a prequel in the book that leads up to like, okay, now we're about to start what this book is truly about. So I do think that the show is validating those storylines that are coming true of the perspectives we see. I noted I'm sure there's someone out there who's done this, but I have wanted to like go through each of the events and see like who was right. Was, you know, the dwarf right? Was I think the dwarf and the jester are the same person, right?
Yeah.
The maester, and then who was the third one?
It's another maester.
It's another
two
maester.
maesters.
Yeah. And just see like, you know, what is our batting average here for each of these people? I haven't done that. That sounds time consuming, but I'm sure it could be done. It's probably out there.
I would say if you haven't read the book and plan on reading the book and have watched the show, maybe you could keep track of that and let us know on Instagram.
Yeah, that'd be great. But I think it is validating. And I think it is a little scary that the mushroom, the dwarf, who has kind of the grossest, most violent perspective on everything, is pretty right a lot of the time, which is a little scary. But I do think the show is validating those storylines. And I think it's really intriguing that because George is so heavily involved in this show, that, I mean, I think it's really fun that he mimics real history with this, where there's competing narratives and history is, you know, the classic saying of history is written by the victor. And I love that George is thinking about his own stuff like that and then gets to validate the true ones in a show like this. Like, it's really cool world building that he can do with all this, but I think the show is validating it.
Okay.
Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you have this book, especially because the book came out first, right? You have this book, there's one perspective that splits into three, sometimes wildly different perspectives of the same event. They pick one, and essentially, the show is saying this is what happened. Yeah. And it makes the rereadability or just even the readability of it
so good,
way better.
Yeah.
When you have the perspective and then you can kind of put these pieces together, then you think about it as, oh, this is a historical telling, and you have, you know, human error or just human biasy, and you're like, oh my God, like it adds a big time level of depth to it when we quote unquote have an answer.
No, I totally agree. And it almost felt like what you were saying there too, spreading this idea of like, this book almost feels like an editor told George, or George told himself, all right, I'm going to stick to one narrative, one viewpoint. And he got halfway through it and he's like, I just can't do it anymore. Because if you've read any of the Game of Thrones books, every chapter switches perspective. So you go from Bran to Arya to Jaime to Cersei, and it's this magical thing. And that's why it takes him so long, because he wants to explore every conflict that's going on from the different perspectives, which makes it so incredible and adds so much nuance to every character. But it's like he got halfway through this one. It was like, I can't do it. Got to show everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I've really only got one more question for you on the book. Oh, sorry. I cut you off though.
No, go ahead. I was going to tee up the first question you had.
Yeah. So I'm just going to rip it at you, and then we can get into the show if you want. We talked about how Game of Thrones started becoming more and more of a miss every season once they passed the written story. This book has 200 years of history planned out. There's multiple perspectives. It's finished. And they're only cherry picking, like 6 chapters for seasons 1 and 2, and possibly even 3. The last 4 could have been 2 seasons easily.
Yeah. What was season 1 was, maybe, just for context, was maybe 80 pages, 100 pages of the book.
Yeah, I think it's like 2.5 chapters, kind of.
Yeah, two pretty chapters. Big chapters.
Yeah, they're big, but it's still only 2 chapters of a 30 chapter book or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, plot is the hardest thing to get right, I think. everybody wants to be Sorkin and write these incredibly complex characters. So it feels like everybody in Hollywood can do that. The truly great writers in Hollywood can make a plot work.
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to be easier to stay relevant and good because they have all of the major plot points built out for here through the events of Game of Thrones?
I do think it is easier. I mean, at least I think they have more leeway and grace amongst fans because there's two things working for them. One, they know where this is ending, which the Game of Thrones showrunners did not. I think A Dance with Dragons, which is wildly confusing, the fifth book in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think that came out after season 1, around season 2 of Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. And I think the showrunners probably assumed, okay, we'll get this next book to lead us along, maybe in a couple of years, maybe by the time we're at season 4 or 5, still waiting on it 13 years later. Yeah, unbelievable. And so that was definitely a hindrance for them, where it's like the track ended abruptly on them, and these showrunners and this show does not have that same challenge at all.
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit. And it's a little bit like, I think we just discussed Fallout, where you have the whole world built. You have the general story of how this world got to where it is and who different factions are. But there's a lot of wiggle room, in how you tell this. And I was shocked even reading this, how much George, as a writer on this show as well, is changing even from the book. There's big pieces that he's himself changing and rewriting. So I think that they're in a much better spot to craft a great beginning to end story because they have all the big pieces in place, and they can, instead of worrying about the age-old question of how does this end? How does this end? How do we land the plane? They can focus on really getting there and making that journey truly excellent, as opposed to stressing over where they're going with it. At least that's my take. How do you feel?
I completely agree. And I actually really like this format, to my point about like Sorkin and characters. You just get a couple really good character writers in here, which it sounds like they did. And obviously you need people carrying a plot, but some of these characters and their dialogue and the way they're brought to life compared to how they're written in the book, S tier. So good.
Yeah.
I am so excited to watch season 2 because I've heard season 2 only gets better. And by the 3rd episode of season 1, I was hooked.
Yeah.
That's when I thought the first 2 episodes, we were kind of building the world, like getting back into the world, building it up. You kind of have to in a big series like this. And then the starting gun went off and they just never looked back.
Yeah.
Just full sprint.
Totally. Yeah. And even though we're saying here that, they had a better job and they're doing a really good job of that, the task that was presented was still enormously, there was a huge hill that they had to overcome here of coming off season 8. And I'm sure everyone collectively at HBO, the showrunners were shitting their pants, like having this come out of just like, is this going to work? Are we going to bring people back? So they had a tough job, but I think they've done a really good job with, what they had, because, we haven't directly said this, even this is a historical text. You were talking about, characterization and building those out. And, it's not like there's dialogue in this book. Like there's not character interactions. It is, we'll see a scene and it'll literally just say what happened in that scene. I'm trying to think, I don't want to say something in fear of spoiling anything, but, they'll just bluntly state what happened, and move on to the next thing. Something that is an entire episode in the show.
Yeah. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this when we get to character, but when you do that in the book, you miss out on a lot of character motivation.
Yeah.
How did they get there? What they get a lot of leeway on what type of character do they want to play, and what does, George and the director and the actor, like, what do they come up with together?
Yeah.
And that was exciting about this text, is that it gives them that freedom to take these characters and just, again, run.
Like, yeah, totally.
There's a few we're going to talk about where
unbelievable.
These are probably career defining roles for them because they're that good.
Yeah, they really are. I think to close out the book stuff, and I'll say, just to reiterate on what you said, I agree that if you're a super fan or even just a big fan, I'd say this is worth reading if you've already watched the show, if you've read the A Song of Ice and Fire books. It just is going to add to your understanding of the world. And it's a nice, and I'd say it's not the thing where you're going to be reading through it. I'm just kind of slowly picking through Jaehaerys's reign because it's 400 pages or whatever, but it's enjoyable from that. It adds to the experience, like you said. But when I was thinking about what this show needed to get right to be successful as an adaptation, I listed out a few things, and I'd love to hear your additions or if your take is totally different. But we've talked about how this show had to rebuild trust. Mm-hmm. And I thought for this to be successful, I think they needed to show everyone that they're going to stay very authentic to the source material, maintain George's involvement, who kind of got pushed out at the end of Game of Thrones. And I think remind people what they really loved about the early seasons of Game of Thrones. And I don't even want to say, I would say 60 to 70% of it, which is excellent writing and complex characters, which you've just hit on the show did. I don't think anyone writes better characters that are kind of mixed motivations than George. Palace intrigue, scenes that kind of just have time to breathe, where it's people sitting in the room and they're discussing, and just kind of those people behind closed doors talking, that you said. And I think the fantastical elements that abide by the rules of the world, if they can get back to those things, I was like, this can be a success. Anything you'd add to that the show had to do?
Yeah, I think for the most part you nailed it. I don't know that I agree that George R.R. Martin writes the best characters with conflicting motivations. I would probably or maybe he's the best, but my favorite right now is Joe Abercrombie. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add, and to your point about the world building, they also need to pull us back into the world we remember.
Mm-hmm.
A lot like with the Ballad of Songbird and Snakes, right? Yeah. You're writing a prequel in a world we already know.
Yeah,
it can't be totally new. It needs to not look exactly the same because it's 172 years in the past or whatever, but it needs to look familiar. The way names work, the way things look and feel as a show need to be there, and it needs to bring you right back into that world that you fell in love with when you watched or read A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, that's a great point. And if you're going to make changes to that world, do it in a way that feels like it's almost righting the wrongs a little bit that people feel. A great example of this is the Iron Throne looks wildly different in this show, and that is because they build a more true version to the book. And that's the type of stuff where people will be like, I'm totally fine with this change because this is more authentic to what I know of these stories. Nobody's going to care about that.
You cannot just plop down on this Iron Throne. It is sharp. There are swords everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was scared for Viserys every episode sitting on this thing.
And then he gets old.
I was like, someone just get him some cushions.
Please.
So we talked about the book. You talked about how this covers a certain subset of chapters, and for some reason, just in case someone has not watched this and they're just enjoying listening to us, I think there actually are a couple of people who said they were going to check this out who haven't watched the show yet. What is this specifically covering in the Targaryen history, Nick?
Yeah, so here's what you need to know. The Dance of Dragons is the Targaryen Civil War that takes place, like I said, I think 172 years, approximately 175 years before the events of the original Game of Thrones series. After the death of King Viserys I, who takes the crown in the very beginning of the very first episode, he's the 5th Targaryen ruler. There's a civil war because he appoints his daughter, Rhaenyra, from his first marriage as his true heir. And that is a massive deal because and George talks about this in the book, actually, it is not done. You don't appoint women as the heir. Like, they don't think the houses will respect them. They think it's going to lead to war. And they set like a precedent for that not being okay. So that was a huge deal.
Yeah.
Rhaenyra's mom dies and King Viserys gets married while he's still ruling and has
remarried.
Four children? 3?
I think
children?
4.
I don't know. Yeah. Either way, at 4. Least two sons, right? So now there's that question of, oh my God, what is this succession?
Yeah.
King Viserys dies. And at the end, he's very sick and he starts hallucinating. But, you know, in the Game of Thrones, you win or die. So now it's both houses competing, you know, Alicent and the Greens versus Rhaenyra and the Blacks. And basically they're competing for the throne because the other family is set to be wiped out.
Yeah. Yeah. And where this will end, I do not know. Nick does. I think I know because it was spoiled in season 3 of Game of Thrones. Joffrey was talking about it in one of the episodes. So I have an idea. And the whole thing I've been doing with this show is like, I'm like thinking about the houses and I'm like, okay, what houses are still in existence in Game of Thrones? I'm like, high towers. Are there really any high towers? Stuff like that. So it's really enjoyable if you watch Game of Thrones trying to predict where this is going to end up.
Yeah. And speaking of characters, though, one of the things I love about this show is that the houses feel the same.
Yeah.
Right? The Lannisters are massive douchebags. And they were massive douchebags. And they continue to be. And it's like, oh my God, this is the Lannister family.
Yeah. It's so much fun seeing all the ancestors to everyone we know. And just seeing that, like, it's incredible.
If you can't see how Jaime Lannister comes from Jason Lannister or whatever the hell his name is, you're missing something because they are the same type of frat boy juice bag. Like,
yeah. Oh, Jaime, my absolute favorite character. And
who?
Jaime Lannister.
Jaime. I don't want to talk about Jaime.
They totally blew it. I know. This is like the only thing, and I will say this as we move into high level thoughts on the show. The biggest praise I can bestow upon the show or this series is that I think you don't even have to watch Game of Thrones to enjoy this. I think it makes it a great experience if you have, but you could really enter into this and not need to know any of the history because this is all before and have a great time. Might even be better because then you could just be sitting there thinking about them massacring my boy Jaime Lannister in the show and, get sad. But I think I was so skeptical, and I think that they really hit a home run, at least I will say in season 1, because you haven't seen season 2. And they had to deliver. They had to. And I really feel like they did. Sounds like you had a similar experience with season 1.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And actually, to what you said earlier, if you are somebody who has not seen Game of Thrones, which feels unlikely, but if you are somebody who does that and you start with the prequel, I would love to pick your brain once you get to Game of Thrones, because I bet you that's a whole different experience watching that series. And I would love to pick your brain. So if that's you, please let us know, because we'll get you on here. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, if there is someone out there who has not watched Game of Thrones and is watching this show, and you reach out, we will have you on the season 2 recap episode.
Yeah.
Because
no, seriously.
Yeah, I would love to talk to someone about that.
Fascinating.
Yeah. We can kick off here with casting in a second, because I just found that, and like you said, the writing to just be, just so good in this show. It felt like they were already really in stride when they got to this. And before we hit those keys, though, I'll just give very, very brief background on the adaptation. Spinoffs had been going on for a while. Mm-hmm. They were originally starting in 2015. They were already, which is season 4-ish, had just ended, kind of peak Game of Thrones. Like at the end of season 4, everyone was like, this is the greatest show that has ever been made. And they were already thinking about what is going to happen, post Game of Thrones. How do we keep printing money the way we are now? And in 2019, 4 months after the conclusion, I didn't realize it was that close. They greenlit House of the Dragon, and
Really?
yeah, and they gave it normally they do a straight to pilot where they, will at least have someone make a pilot. They'll view it. They did that with a lot of Game of Thrones shows, and they'll see the pilot and then they'll cancel it. Happened to the Jon Snow show spinoff we were supposed to get, and there was another one. I think The Long Night it was called, that we did not get either. But this one went straight to series order. They ordered the whole thing upon the initial presentation. Most shocking to me, so showrunners that came in, we mentioned him, Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik. Miguel, very known to Game of Thrones fans. He became the battle director for the series. He did Battle of the Bastards. He did The Long Night. He did Hard Home. So he was held in pretty high esteem overall, and people didn't begrudge him for the season 8 battle episode.
Well, the parts we could see were very good.
Yeah. So he was known and well liked. But Ryan Condal, I mean, wild to me. I think he's done an amazing job. But he had 4 credits heading into this. 2 of them I think he had 3. 2 of them were movies with The Rock, like Rampage and Hercules. And the other was a show called Colony that he worked on with former Law showrunner. So this guy's pretty, like, he doesn't come with a huge track record, and they're placing almost the survival of this franchise on HBO on his shoulders. Pretty bold move. I think it paid off. But yeah, it's kind of how it came to be. It came out in 2022. We had a 2-year gap before this season came out. And now we're getting season 2. I expect it'll probably go like 4 seasons, if I had to guess, of House of the Dragon. But we'll see. Anything you got to say there, or should we roll on to casting and performances?
No, we can roll on to casting and performances. I think you got it. I'm wondering if that gap was intentional or if there was any sort of other delays, because from a plot perspective, this show spans many, many years.
Yeah.
Like literally the lifetimes of many characters.
Yeah.
And you need the younger characters to grow up, or you need to recast them. Yeah. And I'm wondering how much they were just like, well, if we wait an extra year, we can pull this off.
Yeah, I think there were a few things that slowed it down. One being, though they did a straight to series order for season 1, they had to see reception for season 1, and they greenlit season 2 pretty early. But by that point, this is such a large scale production that they were just not going to get it out the next year. Timed up with 2023 being the writer's strike, kind of halted things a little bit more as well. So I think the plan was always 2024, but I think they just needed time to cook up a good season 2.
Yeah.
My first question to you on casting is talking about Rhaenyra and Alicent first, as they're kind of they're the gravity of this show. They're kind of the sun that everything is revolving around, especially in season 1. And I think that they're kind of held up as the representatives of Team Green and Team Black. Black being Rhaenyra, who's Viserys' daughter,
the
Targaryens, and Alicent, who's a Hightower who married Viserys. And I think that they're definitely the most notable recastings, where they're younger actresses halfway through season 1 recast. I've never seen this before in a show done like this. So, Nick, how did you feel about the casting of Rhaenyra and Alicent? And well, maybe we'll start with the younger versions of them, played by Millie Alcock and Emily Carey.
I thought Millie Alcock's performance was lights out.
That's exactly what I was going to use. Stole it.
Really?
Yeah, I was about to say lights out. Cut in with it.
Yeah, she was perfect in that role. I could not find a single flaw there. A young Alicent was very strong as well, though. I mean, I think it was surprising to see the recast. I didn't know that was coming. I just figured they were going to somehow make them look older.
Yeah.
They said, boom, we're done.
Yeah, and it's crazy.
It works.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, come episode 6, we transitioned to the new cast, which, I mean, for some of the children, they're recast multiple times, but they're kind of there's still window dressing at this point, some of the really young children of the show. But to have your main lead, I would say, in Rhaenyra, and you're kind of going to be second lead in Alicent, completely changed halfway through, was a crazy, decision. And I think it went as well as something like this could. I loved the younger actors. I thought they were great. How do you feel that the newer casting, Emma Darcy and Olivia Cooke, do you feel that they picked up the mantle, that they carried kind of the same essence that had been laid by the younger cast?
I do.
Yeah.
And
me as
while
well.
I don't know that I feel that the performances it's weird, because for Rhaenyra, I think the performance isn't quite as good as the younger actress, but for Alicent, I think it embodied much more of what I felt in the book when it was just an older character.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it has anything to do with the actress's performance itself, as more of like coming into what I expected from the role more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Rhaenyra, she goes through, I would say, more intense sort of maturation from young to old, where older Rhaenyra is so much more wise than the younger version of herself. And the younger version was so much fun to watch. She's all over the place. She's so charismatic, Millie Alcock as young Rhaenyra, that you just can't help but not like her, even though she's kind of a brat sometimes. Where Olivia Cooke's Alicent feels a little bit stuck intentionally, I think, in like how Alicent still was when she was younger. So Alicent hasn't changed much, but Rhaenyra loses a little bit of her childhood kind of, I don't know, just kind of energy that she had. But both are great.
Fantastic. Yeah. I have no like criticisms of any of the four actresses. They were all A+ performances. Just some were A performances, a couple were A+ performances.
Yeah. Where do you want to go next in terms of casting?
Let's go to Viserys, because I think you and I do not agree here.
Really?
Looking at your notes. Yeah. Well, I think we agree to a point, and then I think it becomes we're going to have some contention here.
Viserys is maybe the best character in all of A Song of Ice and Fire in terms of the TV show. I think the performance that Paddy Considine gave, I don't know a better one. That character made me feel more than anything I've ever felt with an actor on this show to this point.
Okay. I'll say this. The performance was fantastic. I cannot think of anybody who could play that role better. But I have him as an honorable mention for best casting.
It's too late. He already won.
No,
Paddy Considine won. I'm not picking anyone else. You picked Ewan Mitchell, who's not even in season 1. He's like 2 episodes.
And
you're just being a dick.
Perfect. But those were, I think that Viserys was brilliant. However, there are certain characters in this show that just lit up the screen in such a small amount of time and in over the course of a season, that Viserys as a character isn't as electric. And even though it's like the acting, I think, is of the same quality and maybe arguably more emotional, it's just not who I think of when I think of the show. And it's not who I think a lot of what I see on social media, like the characters that just stole everything when they were on screen. He's not one of them. Like, I don't think he's in scenes with some of the characters that we're going to have for best casting and completely outshining them. And I think it's just the nature of the character. I'm not trying to take away from the performance. I just don't think the character lends itself to the same I don't want to say remembrance, but that same like lasting power in your brain as some of the actions that these other characters take, or the way, the dialogue of some of the other characters. I didn't feel it was the best cast, or I didn't think. Okay, I do think it was one of the best casts. I don't think it is going to get the award because I didn't. Not at all.
This is the wildest take you have ever had on this podcast, bar none. And wildest equates to the worst take you've ever had.
Listen, I'm not saying it. He didn't have a stellar performance. He rocked it, but I
don't know. I watched season 1 live, and I felt the entire buzz outside of Matt Smith was Paddy Considine will win in Emmy for this, and is the best thing to come out of the show. That was the narrative at that time.
At that time.
Well, I'm just saying when season 1
I'm asking. That was a question. That came out as a sentence, but I meant it as a question.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's still considered, but I'm just saying this was the conversation at that time.
Okay. Interesting. Because I didn't watch this until 2024.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. I was not ready to come back to Game of Thrones until we decided to do this. And even then I wasn't sure I was ready, but I was doing it anyway.
Oh, yeah. I'll fight for my Paddy till the end.
He's fantastic.
Oh, man.
When I think of this show, I think of Daemon and Aemond and Sir Christian. I am so excited for you to see the rest of season 2 with Sir Christian.
Yeah. I mean, he's already off his absolute rocker 4 episodes in. I just think that, everyone who's listening to this has watched season 1. This is the only time we can nominate Viserys. All of these characters and actors are carrying these roles forward into the future seasons. So, especially people who are just in 1 to 2 episodes, I can't say that they're a best casting or doing anything even remotely close to what Paddy does with his role. It is like the most electric I've seen since Pedro Pascal came into A Song of Ice and Fire or a Game of Thrones. And it's his own, and like Pedro, he had 1 season and he comes in and just acts his ass off and then is gone. And
see, but I don't know that I would equate him to Pedro in that way. I mean, the 1 season,
Viserys and then is the antithesis of Oberyn Martell for sure.
But like I kind of would make that comparison. Yeah, literally. Like Daemon is who when I watched the show, I was like, oh my, like that's who I thought. Like Matt Smith.
Yeah, incredible.
And Pedro are like the people I was like, these are the same type of things. And at the time when I was watching it, I had no idea what was going to happen with any of these characters. I guess halfway through it, right? So especially, to see how he comes through at the end, and then now knowing what's going to happen, I don't know. Matt Smith is so good in that role.
Yeah, and I think he was the one people were most excited for when casting was announced. Like, wow, Matt Smith is coming to the Game of Thrones world. He's going to be playing Daemon, like who people already knew of, and just what a loose cannon Daemon is. People were hyped. They were very excited. And he is incredible. And he's the only mainstay outside of Viserys because, well, Viserys dies, spoiler alert. But everyone else has been recast, kind of in this show. So at least of the leads, and I'm not including Rhaenys or Corlys here, kind of the real central characters who are every episode. Matt Smith is like, he's the guy. They don't change him when they age up the cast. So he is like kind of the constant, across the series at this point.
Dude,
and does such a good job.
He's so physically, he's so age ambiguous that it's frustrating.
Yeah.
Like if you told me he was 25, I'd believe it. If you told me he was 45, I'd believe it.
Yeah.
And I think when he's 95, he's going to look exactly the same. And the dude does not age.
No.
Like he
I
could
swear
play the
sometimes
younger and the older.
when they do the time hops, I feel like sometimes he looks even younger. I'm like, I don't even know what's going on anymore.
Yeah.
He's just, I mean, Matt Smith plays him to perfection, and he's that quintessential George character where you love him, you hate him, he drives you crazy, he wins your heart back. Everything that he's doing to Viserys, he's doing to the audience as well. Because it's like, you just want to shake him and be like, get it together, and you could like really help us. But it just goes off the rails at some points.
But then they also show you the side where, like, imagine your brother is the king of Westeros, and you're just constantly in the second seat and treated as you're not as good. And like, they show that side of it, and they give him that he's like a villainous anti-hero.
Yeah.
At the like both of them at the same time.
He's got everything.
It's
dude,
and he flies a badass dragon.
Yeah, a little long neck boy. He's great.
Dude,
love Caraxes.
At the end of season 1, he literally walks into a dragon's den by himself.
Yeah.
Against the untamed dragons, where everyone's like, you go in there, you die. Not him.
Yeah.
Not him.
Yeah, I mean, Damon is the type of character where as soon as he's on the screen, you're just excited. You're like, what is this reckless animal going to do now? I can't wait to watch. It's just, there's a different pulse to what's going on in the show when Damon is on the screen, because that's just the type of character Damon is.
You're holding your breath because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Do you want to give me your best casting nominees, and we can, for the ones we didn't hit yet, we can kind of talk through them there?
Yeah. No, and to be honest, Patty was on my list. I left it out so you would get mad reading my notes.
Well, worked.
I was sitting there and I was like, it's going to be fun. Like, because for some context, I live in Houston. Hurricane Beryl wrecked my shit. I didn't have power for 4 days. I didn't, I had a hole in my roof. So I'm sitting in my attic every time it's raining with buckets, like trying not to like ruin my house. I'm literally sitting in my attic while it's raining, typing some of my notes in here. And I was like, I had nothing else to do but try to fuck with Randy.
Yeah. Well, success.
That and catch water in buckets. Like, that's what I was doing. And I was like, I need Randy to be as mad as I am right now.
I'm sweating over here. Give me your fucking nominees.
No, so I did have Matt Smith. That one is a real one. I do think Matt Smith deserves to be at least a nominee for best cast. I had Patty in there as well. I had Millie Alcock as a young Rhaenyra, and the last two I had were actually Steve Toussaint and Eve Best, as Princess Rhaenys and the Sea Snake, because I know they're side characters, and to your point, they weren't in every episode. I could not look away when either one of them was on screen. I thought they were so powerful as an actor and actress. I also had I had two honorable mentions, and one of them was Fabian Frankel as Sir Christian Cole.
Yeah,
I thought he was stellar in this. You get to watch him go from, this character that's in love with the young Rhaenyra and spiral into the villain he is. Great job. The other honorable nominee I had is Ewan Mitchell, because Aemon might be, and I haven't seen season 2 yet, so I don't know how his performance is. But if he's anything like what I saw in season 1, I think he might be my favorite villain of the year.
Yeah, he's a little psycho, that's for sure.
Yeah, he's out of control, and I genuinely think my favorite villain of the year will either be him or Fabian Frankel. So they're honorable mentions, and I would not be surprised in the season 2 episodes if we're like of our stuff, we're not talking about them for a long time. Yeah.
I mean, Aemon is essentially, he's like Ramsay with a dragon. It's like, a terrifying combination. I'll give you your answer quick. So best casting, I'm going to go Patty Considine, but we'll talk through the rest. I think Matt Smith will be the legacy of House of the Dragon. He will be the one that we say is the best character and actor of this entire series. I'll completely agree with that. Patty just got to my heart way too much in season 1 for me to zag any other way. But I agree with you.
Zig?
Yeah, we could zig if you want. Corlys might be my favorite character from Fire and Blood as well as House of the Dragon. Corlys is just magnetic. I love his character so much. Steve Toussaint he's just so good. Are you a Sea Snake stan?
Duh.
Yeah.
I mean, he's essentially a pirate.
Yeah.
That became a lord. He's the most powerful pirate lord.
Yeah.
On TV. You understand even his negative traits. You understand his motivations. Honestly, I wish we had more of him.
Yeah.
I really do. And I get why we don't and what's going on. But man, he was electric in that role.
Yeah.
He was so good. If we had him just as much as we had Patty, we'd probably be having a very different conversation.
Yeah, he's really excellent. And the 1-2 punch of him having most of his scenes with Rhaenys as well, where Eve Best is just so good. When they're just they're so much fun to watch together.
When she comes up out of the dragon's den during the coronation, I was screaming. I didn't realize it. I was screaming. My throat hurt. I was like, why? I was like, oh, I'm yelling because it's like she's so good.
Yeah.
I know what happens.
Perfectly cast.
I don't know if
okay.
I don't know if her story arc is played out in season 2, so I won't say anything.
It was last week.
Has it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see it on screen.
Yeah. She's excellent. I really enjoy it as well, and I won't throw too much shade on I don't want to. It's not throwing shade at all. I don't want to overlook Fabian Frankel because it's almost like taking a Joffrey-esque character where you have that level of hatred towards this person, but to think he started out as someone through the first 3 to 4 episodes we loved kind of as a viewer.
We were rooting for him.
He's best friends with Rhaenyra. Everyone loved him, and then he makes that heel turn. Yeah.
He came from nothing to be in the King's Guard.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah, so well done. He's doing a great job of just totally getting everyone eating out of the palm of his hand of like, I cannot wait to see this guy die. And that's a magical thing to do as an actor in this type of series.
Yeah.
What do you give casting?
5 out of 5.
Yeah, it's a 5 for me.
I don't know how you give it anything else.
Yeah, just unbelievable. Anyone else you wanna talk about here, or we could also hit them as we get into plot and stuff too.
Let's hit them as we get into plot because I think you and I could spend another hour just going through every single character.
Yeah, just gushing over them. So I wanted to tee plot up in this way of we don't, as we talk about, we don't go like completely chronological as the way we talk about things on this show. We kind of hop around and discuss what is relevant. But I do think it's important in this one to just start at episode 1. And when you watch the pilot of this, just how did it land for you? What were you thinking when you first time back in, for you, 5 years since Game of Thrones, how did the pilot hit?
It was not what I expected. And to be honest, the pilot I was on the fence a little bit after the pilot. And there's 2 scenes that gave me pause. And one was the birth of the day-long prince.
That was just tough to watch.
And the violence in the tournament, like on the, I don't know what it's called, but the field, the pitch, whatever.
The kid that won a squire who's throwing up, literally me on that sideline there.
I was afraid that they were going to take this and just make it all about the shock factor of blood and gore.
Yeah.
And I was not excited for that. And by halfway through episode 2, I realized I was wrong about what they were doing. They were they built the violence of the world and then took a big step back, I think, in terms of how they portrayed it. So I actually think it works.
Yeah.
But I needed 2 episodes to get me there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it was almost like in this episode, they needed to remind you of this world and the devastation that it can be. And I think when you watch, kind of, they always do that after the episode stuff, that like 10-minute long segment about making it. This was portrayed a lot of like the battles, on the field, and also the battles in the bedroom that kind of happen here. And, everybody's fighting their own war. And Emma, who's Viserys' wife who dies, she's fighting her own battle, in that bed for her life, and she dies. That was fucking tough to watch. That was maybe the toughest thing I've watched in Game of Thrones, was that scene.
That's fair. Honestly, totally fair.
Yeah. That was just tough. But I think episode 1 was a real win for me for the most part. I loved, we talked about this in The Last of Us too. You kind of get this intro that is a little bit even set before the times, and you're seeing the Great Council, and you have the narration over it, and it feels so fantasy story that I was like really enjoying what they were going for at the very beginning of the pilot. And I can't lie, when the dragon flew over King's Landing in the first like 5 minutes and the music kicked in, I was like, I just had a dumbass smile on my face. I was like, we're fucking back. We are back. Literally like The Hangover when they're in the car.
We are back.
We are back. Yeah, literally. And I enjoyed it a lot. I was at the end of the episode, I started to get really nervous when they started tying it into Game of Thrones, and they had the dagger, and I'm like, oh God, like we're really going to tie it in. And I was like, I'm not ready to reference the show yet. But the speech Patty gave, which came directly from the first trailer about the Song of Ice and Fire and the prince that was promised, it was just such a good scene with him and Rhaenyra at the dragon. And him telling him of the Conqueror's dream. And they killed that scene so much that I was like, okay with it. But overall, I was pretty locked in early on. And you were right that each successive episode, it just heats up.
Yeah.
Real heavy. I want to talk about the time jumps. We talked about those with the casting. How did they work for you from a plot perspective?
Loved it. I think you can't tell that when you have a king who lives but like reigns for 40 years. I don't need to know everything that happens. And if they just tried to do during his reign, it would have gotten boring. So you needed to know where we were coming from. Yeah. Right. And you need to know how we got to, especially Rhaenyra being the heir apparent.
Yeah.
And then you needed to get to the point where you see how the kids interact, especially when there's questions about the father of Rhaenyra's children.
Yeah.
And who that might be. And, we have that whole thing we could talk about too, but you just needed these jumps. They're all so important. They need to happen. And there's so many years, there's so much time in between each one. It worked for me. And I think now, especially because the time jumps we're doing now will still keep the core cast. Yeah. Anybody that's being recast now is a young child that will then become an adult actor. So I'm fine with it.
Totally. Yeah, I think they said they're done with time jumps heading into season 2. Like we're locked in at this point. So the last one was that final episode of season 1, which is great. It didn't bother me either. And I think they came out ahead of time. Ryan Condal was like, we're going to be moving quick through some of this stuff. He's like, it's going to feel different than a traditional TV show in this season 1. He's like, but just hold on, trust us and go with us. And we can, and I think it worked. I do think they did it as well as you could possibly do it in this show. Do you want to talk about, because in these first 5 episodes, it is almost it's the setting to everything. Basically, episodes 1 through 5 we're planting all the seeds of how this conflict even comes to be. I wrote down a few things of, we get things like Alicent and Rhaenyra, childhood friends, a book change, big book change, and their separation as friends, and the betrayal that Alicent feels, the mistake, we get of putting Kristen on the Kingsguard by Rhaenyra. Otto just, Damon says, what does he call him? I wrote it down somewhere. He's like, no matter how much blood the leech sucks, it still wants for more, or something like that, is what Damon says to Otto's face. So we get like Otto's just grip on power, Viserys' passive leadership in these first 5 episodes that just stoke the flames of all of this, spurning the Lannisters. So you're getting just like all these seeds planted. How do you think that they did kind of like laying the groundwork of the plot through the first half of the season?
Really well.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do it here. I'm gonna give plot a 5 out of 5. When you have to lay, like we just talked about it with the time pass, they had so much ground to cover, and they nailed it, and they hit what was important. And you now have established characters with established motivations who are, you can see their feelings, you feel what they're feeling, you understand everything you need to understand going into season 2, which is essentially war.
Yeah. I mean, and it all culminates in that 5th episode of at least the first half, which is the wedding of Rhaenyra and Laenor, where everything that has been sort of teased through these first few episodes is just kind of running rampant at this wedding. And the tension is so high between, Daemon and the Vale for his wife's murder or accidental death, whatever you want to call it, between Sir Joffrey, Laenor's sort of paramour, and Sir Criston. You have Alicent showing up in the green dress. Like everything is just reaching a fever pitch at this wedding. And that was one of the best examples of tension building I've ever seen in a TV show ever.
It's fantastic.
With just like the music and the stomping at the wedding. You're just like, we know a Game of Thrones wedding. We know this is going to go wrong, but we don't know how yet.
It wouldn't be a Game of Thrones wedding if somebody didn't die.
No, you just can't. You're not going to have a good time at this wedding. Like it's going to end badly. But that portion of that first half, it was just like, it was almost the final swan song of the younger cast, of the setup of everything that was to come. And they just did. It was perfect. They really did an excellent job of that. Second half of the season, we talked about how they switched a lot of the cast, but especially our main 2 leads heading into episode 6. How did you feel coming out of the first half of the season? We bring in Emma Darcy and Olivia Cook. Episode 6, like, how did you think that landed in terms of like plot of the transition and leading us into the next phase of the story?
I did, again, not know it was coming.
Yeah.
So caught me off guard, but it took me about 5 minutes, and then I was like, I get it. This is good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see what's happening here. And I think, again, like we said, it was the right call. You couldn't try to age these characters and these actresses to the point where it would have made sense, especially not when there's going to be, more time jumps in season 1, and just, you needed a recast. And bold strategy, Cotton, but it worked.
Yeah, I felt the opening of episode 6 was a masterclass in the Nick Hinkson Award for Show Don't Tell, because
this
is the award winner right here for that. It opens up with Rhaenyra's birth, and where Alicent is making her come show her the baby, and none of this is discussed why, but and then also the acting of Olivia Cook. It felt like this character, Alicent, had not slept since we saw her 10 years ago, however long ago it was, and has just been stewing and festering on what she sees as Rhaenyra's transgressions. And it's like she just hasn't thought about anything else over this time. And you can just feel that in Olivia Cook's performance. And none of this is discussed out loud, but it's just so expertly conveyed as to like where all these characters are now at this point in time and what their relationship is with each other. It was just unbelievably. It was so good.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about, I mean, I'm surprised we didn't ask this in the rapid fire. The big discussion heading into this was Team Green and Team Black. People are talking about.
Dude, Team Black.
I know. I don't understand the perspective
of Team Green. That's why I didn't even ask you. It was so obvious that you were Team Black.
But
Team Black.
When you think about season 1, how do you think they did in terms of portraying the perspective of each side? Like why the Greens are so steadfast in their belief of dethroning Rhaenyra? Like, how do you feel that was done in season 1?
So well. I mean, in the Game of Thrones, you win or die.
Yeah.
There is nothing in the Game of Thrones world that makes me think, no matter what deal was reached, that the other side is going to come out of this alive. And I think that it's got to be so terrifying.
Yeah.
Like living your whole life knowing that moment is coming as a mother or as a father or as a child, a grandfather. Like when you decide to live at that level, you are basically fighting for your life every single day.
Yeah.
So I at least understand the motivations for everybody, and I don't blame them.
Yeah.
This is designed for you for most people at least, to be Team Rhaenyra.
Yeah. And I do wonder, I asked myself this on my rewatch, like, because I feel bad that we did not talk about Otto and casting, because Otto is the new Tywin. He is just such a great presence in this show. Really, really love Rhys Ifans or Ifans. I don't know how to say it. But, I'm watching this and I'm wondering, is that true? The Game of Thrones, you win or you die? Or is that just something that people like Otto and Cersei say to justify their actions? And at any cost? Like, is there a world where there could be some peace between the two sides if there's not somebody like Otto who at every turn is stoking the fire? Or there's now, in that ending dinner scene, this generational trauma that like exists between these families, where there was a moment where Rhaenyra and Alicent patched it up briefly, and then that all went out the window when they play the pig joke on Aemond. And because the fighting that has happened at their level of, their generation has now seeded into the children. And there's no chance that this stays on track anymore.
I don't see that world.
Yeah.
I don't see a world without people like Otto. Also, again, you can't leave. Like, if you're the king, you're facing civil war if there's somebody who has a similar claim on the line of succession, especially when one of you is a female and one of you is male. I mean, like, this world is set in, ancient times where, and he stayed true to, like, women were not treated well then. They were not treated well in this series.
Yeah.
If there's just I don't see a world where there's not this inevitable conflict.
Yeah. Because I think the moment that gave me the most pause is when Otto has just been banished as Hand of the King. He's going back to Old Town, and he's having that conversation with Alicent underneath the gate as he's leaving. And he's telling her, he's like, we have to win, because if Rhaenyra takes the throne, she will kill all your children because they have a claim. And the only thing that gives me pause is I truly don't believe Rhaenyra would do that. And it's just something that someone like Otto says to manipulate Alicent into doing what he wants done and feeling that this is her only choice when I don't know if it is.
I don't know. I still think all roads lead to this war.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. Yeah.
Let's say Rhaenyra lets them go.
Yeah.
And they can go back to their homeland.
Yeah.
Inevitably, other lords looking to raise their station are going to come and say, "Hey, you've got the claim to the throne. What are you doing here? You've got dragons. You can do this too, and we'll support you. And here's my Lannister army."
Yeah,
like I just
there's always going to be somebody out there.
Yeah, and then after you start the Civil War, the outcome is the same. There's only one side that gets to live.
Yeah.
So he might buy a couple years, but I don't think it matters. I think he's right.
Yeah, I think he was being disingenuous about Rhaenyra doing that, but I think he's right that as long as both children are alive, there's going to be fighting over who's the rightful heir. So I want to ask you the biggest criticism when season 1 aired. I'd say the only episode that had initial backlash was the Rhaenys episode. And I think it was people, initially watched it and were pumped. They're like, oh yes, Rhaenys broke out. But they were immediately pissed that Rhaenys didn't light all the high towers up on the stage. And I think also a little bit of her being hypocritical of wanting to avoid war, but being totally cool with bursting through the floor and killing 1,000 small folk in that room. That was the biggest criticism of season 1. And it didn't bother me as much as it bothered some people. I think I was happy to see Rhaenys. I wish she would have lit them up because not all of this would have been avoided. But then that's not the story if she does that.
Right.
That's not how these things go.
I was pissed that she didn't, but I wasn't pissed at the show.
Yeah.
I got it. I was just getting so hype in that moment, and then it doesn't happen, and I was like, no,
why? Just
light them up.
Light them up.
They're bad people. But we didn't get that. And
we didn't get that.
I think that was the right story choice. I don't hold it against that. I was mad for about 5 seconds. You know what I mean? Okay, let's on to the next.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it just sucks because I love Rhaenys so much. And I'm that's the one knock I have against her is just you had a chance and you didn't take it. But were there any other changes from the book that stuck out to you or you didn't like, or any things that season 1 just didn't do well? We talked a lot about what we did like about season 1, but anything that didn't work for you?
Not really. I mean, I thought even the things that didn't hit 100% for me, I was this is fine. There was so many things that they did right. And the more you do, we talk about this all the time, the more you do right, the more leniency you get when something's not 100% there. Yeah. So there's none that stick out to me as this bothered me.
Yeah.
Changes from the book are going to have to happen. I mean, it's inevitable in every single adaptation. So again, nothing that is jumped out at me as I was prepping for this.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I almost think any change they make has been for the better. I can't think of one thing I read in Fire and Blood where I'm I wish they would have done that instead. All right, I'll give you
haven't met Mushroom.
What was that?
We haven't met Mushroom.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have met Mushroom.
I'm assuming we're not gonna.
No, but it's just weird because that's that would be my one thing, I think, because we've met the Maesters that go with both of them. Why are we not getting another person whose point of view from the book we use in the show? So that would be my one gripe is that if you don't have the Maesters, fine. But you can't have the Maesters and have this other central character to telling this story and then not have them in the show.
Yeah.
Especially when you're using what they're saying. Like if Mushroom in the story was so wildly out there that nothing ever happened, and you could just be like, okay, this was a clown who may or may not have been there doing this. But when you take his point of view, we already said you're validating it. And if you're going to validate somebody's point of view, they should be there.
Yeah.
Even if we just see them in the background and never meet them.
Yeah. Yeah. I never thought about it until you said it, that he's not in this at all. Yeah, I don't really have any complaints. I gave it a 4.5 because I think there's always room for a little bit of improvement here, but mainly it's because I'll just knock it for the Rainy spit. I think the only issue I have with it, I think her not killing them is a great depth to her character because it shows she's human. She makes decisions in probably a very stressful moment, but I think like just having them kill all of those small folk and then not really ever even address that. It was like my only gripe with that episode. It feels weird that like nobody has even brought it up or like nobody's even angry that she just massacred all these people. But maybe that's just how it goes in A Song of Ice and Fire. Is nobody cares about the small folk.
I mean, that's been proven time and time again in Game of Thrones in general.
Yeah.
I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. I knocked it for the mushroom piece.
Okay. Best episode nominations.
Hit me with it.
I went with the pilot, The Heirs of the Dragon, which I think we can wipe that out for what you're going to vote for. We Like the Way, which is episode 5. That is the final young cast episode, the one with the wedding scene.
Great episode.
Episode 7 is Driftmark. That's Lena's funeral episode. Or no.
That was powerful.
Driftmark. Yeah, that was Lena's funeral episode. That was Aemon steals Vhagar. A lot going on there. Episode 8, The Lord of the Tides. This is the episode where Rhaenyra comes back and is fighting for her claim. Viserys shows up in the throne room and does the march up to the throne to re-show his support for Rhaenyra, asks for one last dinner with his family, and then all that goes to shit. He dies.
Good episode, yeah.
And all hell breaks loose. And then I put the final episode, The Black Queen, which is kind of post Viserys' death on the black side. I'm questioning Driftmark. I think that's also the episode. They're kind of blending a little bit together now, where Alicent and Rhaenyra get in the fight as well after Aemon steals Vhagar, and there's the conflict in their throne. That is such a good scene. But I think that's episode 7, Driftmark, as well.
I got to go with episode 7, I think, because all of that right there is so important to the rest of it.
Yeah, it was such a good episode. Yeah, episode 7 and 8, they were my like 10 out of 10s.
They were kind of the pinnacle of the season. Mm-hmm. And then you had the falling action after that. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, Viserys showing up in the throne room, nearly shed a tear of him.
Yeah.
That march down with his golden mask on. Oh my God. Like, what are you doing to me, Patty? Just great stuff. I mean, those episodes 5, 6, 7, 8 were just really good stuff. And I do want to say we overlooked episode 9 here. There's just those final 2 episodes. They're kind of 2 pieces.
They kind of blend together.
Of the same coin, where episode 9 is the Greens' reaction to Viserys' death and keeping it under wraps. So good, so interesting. Our poor guy Beesbury just gets his head slammed into the table by Kristen Cole. He's the only dude trying to say this is not right. And then the Black's reaction, and then Lucerys' death. That was, talk about anxiety, was Luke trying to fly away on the dragon from Vhagar. As soon as he lands at the Baratheons, Storm's End, I was just like, this is bad. This is not going to go well.
And you saw Vhagar in the background.
I was just like, oh my God. Yeah, that's tough. World building and aesthetics.
I don't know. There's so much we haven't talked about here. We've talked about.
I mean, the show's stunning.
It's beautiful. The dragons are 11 out of 10.
Yeah. I just can't believe this is a television show. Like, I can't believe how good it looks.
There's so many dragons, and they all look incredible. And I give this a 5 out of 5. I don't really know that there's nothing I haven't already said. I mean, it's just production is brilliant, aesthetically brilliant. You're right back into the world you love. You fell into back into it so fast, and they're building on it.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I agree. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 as well. This show is flexing so hard in this area in terms of the world building and aesthetics.
Yeah.
The production design is unreal. I think if I had to pick a favorite shot of the show, and I don't know if you have one that sticks out, is when Daemon and Otto are having their meeting on the bridge at Dragonstone after Daemon has left for the first time. And Rhaenyra decides to fly off on her own to resolve this. And they don't know she's coming. And she comes in under the clouds on Syrax. That was the best. It looks so good.
So cool. so cool.
That one really stood out to me as an awesome shot in season 1. Anything stick out to you?
That you honestly probably could have put that up for best episode, like just that scene. And I might have just picked that scene. That was and we talked about it earlier. The Iron Throne looks badass.
Yeah.
It's so pointy. And there's so many of the other swords all around it, like you get in the books. Like they really went back to what the Iron Throne was described as.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Another great bit of world building that I think they do in this that we haven't touched on, outside of saying the dragons look cool and we like Daemon's dragon, they really hype up this idea that these dragons are a weapon of mass destruction, and they really want to avoid using them at all costs. And they're just building that. And look, I know where Game of Thrones starts and how many dragons are in this world. There's not a lot. And I'm devastated thinking of what I'm going to have to witness on the screen with these dragons. But they do such a good job of building just kind of the mystique and deadliness of what they can do.
And visually, they're all different. They're the same, but
so different. Unique. They do a great job of that. Truly excellent. We both already gave this one 5 out of 5.
What do you got for sound? I mean,
sound.
It's what you'd expect from Game of Thrones.
It's what you come to expect from Ramin Djawadi, who's just, I feel like he's the next in line of John Williams, Hans Zimmer, and it's going to be this guy. Like he is doing,
that's a bold statement,
incredible stuff, and writing some of the biggest themes of our times. I mean, we'll start here. How did you feel about the Game of Thrones theme returning?
It was the only thing I thought was logical.
Yeah.
I would have been shocked if we got anything other than the original. Now, I thought the visual would be very different, but I thought the music itself was going to be exactly the same.
Yeah, I did. At first I was like, oh, they kept the same theme. But it makes sense.
I mean, you're building the same world.
Yeah.
Just different times.
Yeah, it's excellent. He's just so good. I was listening to it as we prepped. I will say, maybe this is being harsh on Ramin. I'm going to give this one a 4. His music is excellent. I love Ramin, but I'm saving this for the moment where we get a real killer new track from him. He was retreading there was a lot of new music in this. Definitely was.
Okay.
But the main theme, the Targaryen theme, the flying over King's Landing, all that stuff, it was iterated on. But once we get kind of what is the scene where they blow up the Sept in Game of Thrones, like that, once we get that music piece, maybe that's season 2, I can elevate this up to a 5. But there wasn't that piece of music that like he was cooking real hard yet.
I'll tell you what, I think I know exactly what scene you're going to get it for in season 2.
Oh boy.
And I will let you know.
Yeah.
If I'm right. I'll write it down so that you can, and you'll see me write it down, but I won't tell you.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, he's great. He's excellent. It's hard to knock anything in terms of the production of this show, from production up through sound. They're killing it. But I know he's got one of these in his bag, so that's why I'm going to give this one a 4 for now.
I wrote it down.
What are you at for score on sound?
Yeah, I think 4 is fair. Because you're right, like, the sound is fantastic, but the biggest thing they did was reuse what he already was known for.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, not to say there wasn't new stuff, he didn't iterate on it. But he had a good head start.
Yeah.
Legacy standalone. We set this up in the beginning. Show had so much work to do. Did they do it?
Did it.
Yeah, they did it.
Yeah, standalone. You're right. You don't need to know any of this, and I'm curious to see if somebody who has gone through this first and then Game of Thrones, what that's like for them. Legacy, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. The hype around season 2 starting speaks for itself. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to stop it at like right before season 2 premieres, right?
Yeah.
For the legacy of season 1. But I mean, there was so much hype, and there was so much hype when it was coming back, and they took a big swing on a couple things and they knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I was expecting there to be a longer runway to people being back on board, because there are still subreddits out there on Reddit. I see you free folk that are bitter and are just angry still.
There's always going to be.
But I just expected even the general people to just need a little more time to warm up. But it was pretty instantaneous. People were back in right away. And it's like, we all knew we wanted to come back, but we were just too afraid to say it. I think they did a great job. I think the legacy of this show, we'll see. I think they're really going to do, this is some of the best writing I've ever seen in television, bar none. It's unbelievable that I think we're going to look back on this very fondly.
Yeah, I always said that about early Game of Thrones too. So the legacy of season 1 of Game of Thrones does not change because season 7 and 8 sucked.
Yeah.
Season 1 of Game of Thrones is still one of the best individual seasons of television I think I've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's crazy
for sure
is
in my top 5.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones could make up 4 of my 5 for top 5. They're just so good. I think we're going to look back strongly on this standalone appeal as well. I'll give this a 4.5 for now. Just we'll see where we're at. There's some things that they're gonna have to land the plane, or everyone is going to be really upset, and that's not a season 1 job, but still to be determined. But talk about hitting a home run as your start. They did it.
Yeah. I'm excited to watch season 2.
What did you give a rating?
5 out of 5.
Man.
This was probably our highest. It only lost 3 total points. This is a 47 out of 50.
It lost 3. Yeah. That's good. We have a few coming up that are going to be a little more balanced in terms of their score that we've already recorded. I mean, we're also coming off the Watchers, which we didn't score that high. But man, between this, Oceans, and Pirates.
Do you think people like listen and they're like, your taste is shit?
Dude, I don't care what anyone says. Those 2 movies are 5 out of 5 movies.
And this season is a 5 out of 5.
Yeah, it's expertly done. I loved it. Anything else you want to get off your chest on the House of the Dragon world?
No, I will say that season 2 is going to be much more timely than season 1 release. Obviously, we're halfway through season 2 at the time of recording this. And as soon as season 2 wraps up, we're going to be, putting together an episode and releasing it. So please let us know what you think of the season, what hit for you, what missed for you. We'd love to include your thoughts.
Absolutely. I will. I'll put on record here, because I've not read it, and we're recording it. before I know what's going to happen. I've been trying to think because I can't discuss it with you where this is going to end.
Yeah, don't ask me because I'll tell you.
It hinders our plot section a little bit. We can't run out that thread because
Yeah.
I suspect an heir on the team black side is going to win. It is, I can't see Rhaenyra being on the throne. I can't see any of that age group, a Rhaenyra, a Daemon, and Alicent. I don't think any of them are making it out in power. But I think an heir on Rhaenyra's side, one of her and Daemon's children, will be the heir. And it's definitely not, when I say their children, that means I'm cutting out Jake or Jace. I just can't, he's a half strong. Sorry, Rhaenyra, he is. He just can't.
That's blasphemous.
I know.
You'll get your head chopped off for saying that.
He's gonna die. As much as it pains me to say, I can't see. Aemon is too much of a wild card to make it through to the end. I think he's gonna take down some people with him. But I see one of Daemon and Rhaenyra's younger children being the heir on the throne.
Okay.
So we'll see how it ends. But I'm nervous. I'm really nervous to see these dragons fighting.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. You know
what I'm going to say.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I said, I'm thinking of what I know of these houses and where they're at in Game of Thrones. And I'm like, we don't know the Velaryons. We don't hear anything about Driftmark. And it makes me very nervous for my guy Corlys. So there's some things like that where I'm shitting my pants over here thinking about it. We got to end this with who stole the show, season 1 for you. Who won the, we say won the movie, who stole the show, won the show, whatever. Got two nominees we need from you.
Game of Thrones fans, because I feel like we're back. We've said it, back. We're back.
Yeah.
So the fans of Game of Thrones, for sure, have to be at least nominated.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. They do have to be.
And my second nominee is going to be, I'm going to go with Matt Smith, but only because he's being catapulted into season 2 and potentially beyond.
Yeah.
And not to take away from Patty's season 1 performance, but when you have a Matt Smith do that and they get to keep going, winner.
Yeah. 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 What is crazy is I'm also in my head, I had already written down 2, but I'm like, she was there for half the time, but Millie Alcock did really
she killed it.
She came off the bench and scored 1,000 points in 2 minutes. And you're like, what just happened? This girl just ran wild on us.
If she had a whole season.
Yeah. I'm excited to see her in some new works now that I hope this springboards her career. I'll give an honorable mention to Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik for guiding this show back into the hearts of Game of Thrones fans, because you're right. At the end of the day, we won 100%. We
did.
I'll agree with you that I think I can go with Matt Smith stole the show. I mean, he is the agent of chaos of everything going on. But
yes,
at the end of the day, all of us sitting there with our popcorn, we're the true winners here.
Yeah. It really is. Like we're getting to go back to this world that we fell in love with, and it's healing some old wounds.
It is, yeah. And it is truly, to kind of wrap up the whole discussion, I mean, this is the best example of a show book that exists where kind of switching back and forth between them as a fan is so rewarding. A reread on these books are so rewarding because you can see all of these characters, which is so hard to track in the book. And if you put a face to a name and you read the book, it's a little bit easier. It's almost one of the way that they work in tandem is really nice for real fans of the series. Because man, I remember the first time I read a Game of Thrones and I'm trying to track who all these characters are. It's a lot. George does not skimp on his character names.
There's so many.
And
they're all the same. Rhaenyra, Rhaenys.
I know. And then you
have
the Tullys, which are Oscar, Elmo, and Kermit. There was also, I wrote down, there was a Peter Piper. I was like, George, what is wrong with you?
He's having fun.
Yeah.
He had one too many brandies and started writing down names.
Yeah. The only thing I'm sad we didn't talk about outside of the intro was Viserys building his little house inside his bed. Like, could you imagine, like, what is your spouse saying if in your bedroom they are building a Lego set that takes up 80% of the room? Like, you can only get away with that if you're the king.
Yeah. Who's going to tell him no?
Yeah. So funny. All right. I think we can end it there. Thanks for listening, everybody. Like Nick said, when season 2 comes out, we'll be coming back to your ears with coverage. Spoiler alert, season 2 is great.
Tell everybody to stream this as soon as you hear this, especially if it's within the first 24 hours, because
I'll get a tattoo. Yeah.
Hold
me to it.
And again, if we do it, we are for sure streaming it on Instagram, watching Randy get a Game of Thrones tattoo. So
yeah, I'll probably cry. Next episode, going to be returning to the world of pixels. We've already recorded the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Return to childhood for Nick and I. So that'll be a fun one. A little bit lighter tone than House of the Dragon.
Nobody dies.
Yeah, less trauma. If you have thoughts, questions, you can reach out to us via email, rewatchplaypod@gmail.com, Instagram at rewatchplaypodcast. Find us on all your major platforms, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate and review 5 stars only, so those things help more people find the show. And please tell your friends about it if you're enjoying it. Thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks, Nick, for joining me. Till next time, everybody.